Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is facing strong criticism this morning after using yesterday's briefing on the war in Iran to denounce how the press is covering the conflict. Watch.
This is what the fake news misses. We've taken control of Iran's airspace and waterways without boots on the ground. We control their fate. But when a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality.
Now, what he's referencing there is the drone attack in Kuwait that claimed 6 American lives. That should be front page news. And in a piece for The Atlantic, Tom Nichols criticized the secretary's response to the tragedy for that reason, because he wrote in part, Hegseth seems unable to grasp that the deaths of Americans are not merely a public relations problem. When a drone slips through U.S. defenses and kills 6 members of America's armed forces, the deaths of those service people are the story. The people of the United States deserve to know what happened and why. Hegseth complaining that he's not getting credit for all the drones that didn't get through is like an airline executive responding to an air disaster by growling about all the planes his company made that didn't crash. It's important, especially when Hegseth could be giving those briefings in the same way that General Kane is giving them, which is to say there are things we can tell you about what we're doing. There's other things that for operational security reasons we can't. That is always the push and pull between the Pentagon and the press. But given the way the Pentagon has hollowed out the press who are allowed to be in that room, it is imperative that these questions are asked and not pushed back on with some red meat conservative backlash that the secretary is trying to leverage there. This is war or something like it, and there are questions that need to be asked. Some young voters also appear to be grappling with this war in Iran. Reuters spoke to a student panel this week at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire. At least 6 Trump voters expressed a mix of approval and unease following the strikes. They voiced support for killing Iran's leader, but also worried that Trump's push for regime change could pull the U.S. into a prolonged conflict. One 19-year-old male student told Reuters, quote, "One of my things with Trump was going to be America first. That was the rhetoric he was running on." The student added, "It's not that I disagree with the war or the strikes. We need to learn more and see what's going to happen. But it felt like a step back from what he was saying." I think that's right when we see the way that he's reshaping the MAGA orthodoxy that he put forward. Our next guest is also speaking with young Americans about the Trump administration's actions overseas. I want to bring in Rachel Janfaza, founder of the Up and Up, a research firm and newsletter focused specifically on Gen Z. Rachel, good morning. I want to thank you for coming on. I think the most striking thing when I was reading through the work that you did was the overall sense from Gen Z that they actually don't know if anyone knows what's going on here. How does that relate to the war in Iran? Talk about what you've heard from them as we are now 6 days into this conflict.
Good morning, Allie. Thank you for having me. So you mentioned I have been holding listening sessions with groups of young people and did a reality check, qualitative survey, checking in with our Gen Z community. And across the board for a while now, the #1 issue for young people has been stability, cost of living. And from their perspective, nothing is potentially more costly than the idea of war. It threatens not only their cost of living, but their emotional, personal stability. And so this is something that is top of mind. We are hearing when they think about Iran, they have nuanced points of view. They can both believe that the government in Iran was dangerous and also question the motives from this government and if there is a plan in place. And you talked about the distrust that I heard. There is a pervasive sense of distrust amongst young Americans when it comes to this administration. It's not just about this war. It's the slew of things that continue to happen over time, whether it's their inability to bring down prices, whether it's the Epstein files, and now what's going on with foreign conflict.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because part of the reason I was so interested, yes, is the ways that various groups of voters and Americans are reacting to this latest conflict. I think a skepticism of war, as a millennial myself, is sort of baked into the DNA of the younger generations that rise through this country, regardless of the administration. But can you talk about why it's so important to continue tracking distrust in institutions, especially when this is how the population that is growing up in this country is starting to think about our government? That seems like a dangerous mindset, especially if it's not disrupted.
Totally. I think distrust is the pervasive sentiment that Gen Z has been raised with. we grew up with phones, with the ability to see everything happening in real time in our pockets at all times, and also not to trust anything that we see online. And so those are in conflict with one another. At the same time, this is a generation that grew up during COVID. And I think that was a really early experience for young people to say, oh, the adults in the room actually might not know the answers to what's going on and are kind of winging it, whether it was with school lockdowns that maybe extended past the time when they thought they should, or contradictions that existed in rules and regulations within schools. It could be as simple as, when you were supposed to wear a mask and when you were allowed to not. Yeah. And so they started to see those cracks in authority early. And they also saw it playing out online and were able to voice those concerns online. And so this is something that I've been tracking for a while. But I have to say, I spoke to hundreds of young voters throughout the pandemic, and the distrust that I'm seeing now tops what we heard in 2020. I think that it's just been one thing after another. And I had a young woman in a listening session the other night tell me that it feels like no one has any idea what's going on. She can't trust her professors to know what's going on. She can't trust what she sees online. And it's a really striking way to grow up. I think at least, in the past, prior generations, of course, there's always been disillusionment with the government. That is not new. That's not unique to Gen Z. But what is different about the way Gen Z is experiencing this is the way that they're having these conversations in real time, not just with their friends, but with everyone around them on the internet. And they're seeing these cracks break down slowly, piece by piece. I think it's a really different time to grow up in America than it has been for any prior generation.
Different, and it sounds very destabilizing as well. And I think to pivot back to your latest piece, especially as we focus on foreign policy, is you're sort of asking this broader question about what if Gen Z is actually moderate on foreign policy? And I wonder if that surprises you, that they're taking a moderate stance, given the fact that there's just confusion. To me, it seems like a natural outgrowth, but I wonder what you think.
I think that the fact that Gen Z is coming out with more of a moderate stance here is actually pretty rational. I think they can look and see the way that Iranians might be reacting to potential idea of regime change, and they are able to watch that in real time on TikTok or on Instagram or wherever, on X. And so they're seeing that, and they're like, okay, I can be cautiously optimistic here. But then where they express concern or reservation is that it doesn't seem like this administration has a plan, and that they're not sure what the next steps will be or how this will unfold. And so they are able to hold those two truths both at once. And then they're also thinking, you were talking about that Reuters report and the fact that there are many young people in this country who have been sold this idea that this president will put Americans first. And that just doesn't seem like what is happening. And so they are grappling with that as well. And I'm definitely seeing some of the president's support, with even his strongest supporters from 2024, starting to crumble a bit there because of that.
Yeah, because the MAGA coalition did a great job of energizing young voters in 24. I think it's a really important thread. Rachel Jen Fazza, thank you for bringing it to us. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Allie.